I never believed in what they call a sixth sense, but that day, standing under a wall of freezing rain in the middle of a forest highway, I realized that sometimes the body reacts faster than the brain. It was an ordinary day around 3 o'clock, but because of the severe storm around, it felt like twilight had already set in. I was about to get back into the car, writing everything off as a trick of the wind and my own paranoia, when suddenly I heard it. The sound was so quiet that it was almost completely swallowed by the noise of the downpour, but it was there. A thin, desperate, agonizing squeak. This was not the cry of an animal calling for help. This was the sound of someone saying goodbye. And it echoed from the depths of the wet bushes, just a few meters from my hood. I took a step forward. It all started about 20 minutes before this. It was the middle of the day, an ordinary Tuesday, but the weather had sharply deteriorated. The sky was covered with heavy gray clouds, and such a downpour began that the wipers on my windshield could barely cope at maximum speed. I was driving along a forest road, heading back home. The highway was completely empty. Only the sound of rain on the car roof, the warmth from the heater, and the monotonous gray landscape outside the window. I perfectly remember this feeling of comfort and safety in the car cabin, when there is absolute hell outside the window, but you sit in warmth and just want to get home faster. But on one of the turns, where the forest comes almost right up to the asphalt, I noticed something strange on the side of the road. It was an ordinary cardboard box. It was half soaked and had sagged under the weight of the water. The wind fluttered its edges, but there was something unnatural about it. It stood entirely too evenly, as if it wasn't just thrown out of a moving window, but purposefully placed there. In a dense forest, many kilometers away from the nearest houses. I drove past. My brain automatically produced a logical explanation. Someone simply threw out some trash. But about 200 meters later, I hit the brakes. Something inside wouldn't give me peace. I reversed on the wet asphalt, stopped, turned on my hazard lights, and got out of the car. The cold hit instantly. Daylight barely pierced through the downpour. Raindrops hit my face, and water immediately seeped into my shoes. I took a few steps toward that soggy box, and that's when I heard that very sound. The box was literally falling apart before my eyes. The cardboard had turned into dirty mush. When I leaned in and carefully pulled back the soaked edge, 2 kittens were sitting inside, huddled in the farthest corner. They were so dirty and wet that their fur had turned into continuous spiky strands. They were definitely brought here. No one could have accidentally lost 2 tiny animals in a closed box in the middle of the forest. I reached out my hand. One of the kittens, slightly larger in size, sharply raised its head. It was trembling so much that it transmitted through the cardboard to my fingers. But despite its pathetic state, it opened its mouth and tried to hiss at me. There was no sound. Perhaps it had lost its voice earlier. The gesture was absolutely clear. It wasn't just sitting in the corner. It was covering the other one with its body. The second kitten wasn't moving at all. It lay on its side, halfway in the water that had pooled at the bottom of the box. Its eyes were closed. That was where that barely audible sound was coming from. Every breath took incredible effort, accompanied by a quiet, raspy whistle. I tried to move the older one aside to reach the smaller one. The larger kitten immediately dug its tiny claws into my sleeve, trying to drive me away. But as soon as I touched the smaller one, my breath caught in my throat. It was freezing. Not just cold, but a literal lump of ice. No reaction to the touch. Its muscles were completely relaxed. I lifted him with both hands, and his head slumped back lifelessly. His brother instantly jumped up, clinging to my hands, trying to get to him. I stood in the rain, holding in my palms an animal that showed almost no signs of life, and I clearly understood. If I didn't do something right now, it would die right here. I grabbed both of them. I stuffed them under my jacket, right onto my clean clothes, ignoring the dirt and water, and ran to the car. My hands were shaking so much that I couldn't immediately insert the key into the ignition. The heater was on maximum. Hot air from the vents hit my face, instantly filling the cabin with the sharp smell of wet fur and damp earth. I placed them on the passenger seat. The larger one immediately, without waiting a single second, piled on top of his brother. He completely covered him with his body, trying to share the remnants of his own body heat. and kept his tense, terrified gaze fixed on me. The road to the city turned into a continuous, blurry spot. I pressed on the gas, ignoring the puddles and the sound of the rain beating against the roof. Only one thought pulsed in my head. Let it not be too late. When I flew through the doors of the nearest 24-hour veterinary clinic, I could barely stand on my feet. The doctor on duty, without asking any unnecessary questions, snatched the smaller one from my hands and quickly carried him to the examination table. And then the larger one broke loose. He started thrashing in my hands, screaming this time at the top of his lungs, piercingly and frighteningly. He was breaking free with such force that I could barely hold him. He physically would not allow his brother to be taken away. His panic was completely uncontrollable. A few minutes later, which felt like hours to me, the veterinarian came out into the corridor. He pulled off his gloves, looked at me with a heavy, tired gaze, and said, "We placed him on heating pads and connected him to oxygen. But his body temperature is so critically low that the thermometer doesn't even register it. I cannot give any guarantees. The next few hours will decide everything." This night merged into one long, anxious marathon. IV drips, heating lamps, constant pulse checks. The smaller one did not react to anything. He simply lay on the table like a small, lifeless rag. His heartbeat was barely palpable. Then the doctor proposed an unconventional solution. He said that sometimes medications alone are not enough. The animal needs a stimulus to hold on. We opened the incubator and carefully let the older one in. I will always remember what happened next. The larger kitten, himself still exhausted and frightened by the procedures, immediately crawled over to his brother. He wrapped his paws around him, pressed closely against him, and started purring very loudly. This vibration filled the entire plastic box. It was as if he was trying to jumpstart his brother's heart with his own. He licked his snout and didn't stop purring for a minute, and it worked. By morning, the smaller one lifted his head independently for the first time and tried to lean on his paws. A month passed. Those two half-dead lumps of dirt from the box turned into incredibly cute, fluffy kittens. They gained weight, their fur became thick and soft, and their eyes grew clear and playful. They tore through my apartment at the speed of a tornado, but they did it exclusively together. They ate from the same bowl, slept intertwined in a single ball, and if one was out of the other's sight for even a minute, panic ensued in the apartment. I would have kept them for myself without hesitation if it weren't for my work schedule. Frequent business trips and irregular shifts, I simply had no right to keep them locked alone in an empty apartment. I had to make the hardest decision, to find them a real family. I took nice photos and published an ad. Since the kittens were truly beautiful, the calls started almost immediately. People admired their appearance, but all conversations ended at the exact same point. Everyone wanted to take only one. The fluffiest, the most active, the smallest. No one wanted to take responsibility for two cats at once. Finally, on the weekend, a family came to see me, a husband, a wife, and their daughter who was about 10 years old. Over the phone, they seemed like ideal candidates. A spacious house, financial stability, and a sincere desire to help a shelter animal. But as soon as they crossed the threshold and saw the cats playing on the rug, the father of the family looked them over and said firmly, "They are wonderful." But we agreed right away. We are ready to take only one. These words hung in the room like a heavy, cold cloud. Only one. I stood and looked at this seemingly perfect family, feeling everything clench inside me. The rational part of my brain was screaming, "Agree. It's a great house, responsible people, you have a terrible schedule. You can't keep them." But when I lowered my eyes to the rug, where the two of them had just started a playful fight, rolling around in a fluffy ball, I realized that I simply couldn't do it. If I separate them now, after one literally pulled the other from the beyond with his warmth, I would be no better than the person who left them to die in the freezing rain. I took a deep breath, preparing to politely decline and escort the guests out. But at that moment, the situation resolved itself. The girl, the daughter of these people, ignoring our adult conversation, sat right on the floor and reached out her hands. The smaller kitten, the very one whose heartbeat we once couldn't feel, trustingly walked up to her. She carefully picked him up, pressing him to her chest. He meowed quietly. That sound was enough. The older brother instantly stopped playing. He froze, stretched out his neck, fixating his gaze on his younger brother in the hands of a stranger. And then, without any hesitation, he jumped. He jumped right onto the girl's lap, dug his paws into his brother's fur, hugged him tightly, and pressed his whole body against him. And in that same second, the room was filled with a loud, deep purring. They purred in unison, the same sound I had heard in the plastic box of the veterinary intensive care unit. The sound of absolute protection and unity. Silence reigned in the room. The girl's father, who just a minute ago had been talking about his strict rules, stood silently watching this scene. He watched as the older cat licked the younger one's ear, not intending to step back even a single pace. The girl looked up at her, father with tears already welling in her eyes, and whispered, "Dad, we can't take him." The tension snapped like a taut string. The man exhaled heavily, rubbed his face with his hands, and, with a barely noticeable smile, said, "It seems we'll have to buy a bigger carrier." An hour later, I stood on the threshold of my apartment and watched them walk to the car. This time, it wasn't a soggy cardboard box on the side of a forest highway. It was a large, warm carrier with a soft blanket inside, carefully carried by the new owner. 2 saved lives. This story always reminds me of one important paradox in our world. Where there is room for the darkest, coldest human cruelty, the capacity to throw living beings to certain death, there will always be room for absolute, uncompromising love. A love that forces a tiny animal to give its last warmth to its brother. A love that compels us to stop the car in the pouring rain. You know, usually on this channel, we explore wildlife rescue stories and incredible cases of human survival in extreme conditions. But sometimes the most dramatic battle for life unfolds not in a stormy ocean or impenetrable jungles, but in an ordinary wet box just a step away from an asphalt road. And the heroes are not professional rescuers, but those who simply refuse to give up. Have you ever had to rescue animals on the street? Tell your story in the comments. I read every single one, and I pin the best ones to the top. If this story made you feel even a little bit of warmth, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Take care of yourselves, be attentive to those around you, and see you in the next video.